Oye mi gente, Welcome back to the third season of Oye mi gente podcast. Thank you so much for sticking with us through another season. I am eternally grateful to have you all tuning in. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I appreciate you as well. This is Viv Moran. I'm a multimedia artist from South Jamaica, Queens, and your favorite tia. At this moment, I would like to start us off with our daily affirmation. I want to invite you all, my beautiful gods and goddesses, and everyone in between who tune in every week. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I invite you to join in as well. Affirmation. I am open, free, and loving. Now that we have charged our inner spirit crystals, I will now introduce our guest, Bianca Martinez. Bianca is an extremely proud, two-spirit, queer, gender non-conforming Boricua warrior, mental health advocate, and self-proclaimed bruja by way of New York. Bianca is a co-producer of a new media platform called Eres, and host of its video podcast, eres.Tea Talks. A creative educator, facilitator, and activist, Bianca has spent much of their years working with youth and using their online presence to share resources and intimate stories about their own experiences battling mental illness. A poet by design, Bianca is a lover of all things nature and believes beauty can be found in the darkest of corners. Hi, Bianca.
Hey everyone. Hey Viv, how are you?
Good. How are you feeling?
A little nervous. It's weird being on the other side of things.
Right? How's your spirit?
Well, with everything going on lately, my spirit is a little dim. I'm not going to sit here and lie about that because, what's the point in that, right? We're here to honor our truth. So I'm honoring my truth and understanding that my spirit is not in the best of places, but we're working through it and using our resources and everything else in between to do what we got to do to make it through a day.
That's big facts because the way that things are set up right now, like people with mental illnesses, our stress levels are like past 100.
They are on, if there's no to 100 at this point, because it's far beyond that.
So to start this interview, I would like to offer you to take a deep breath with me. This interview may get a bit heavy, and I want to make sure I'm able to hold space for all those feelings as well. Ready?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Deep breath. Okay, let's start. Let's get into what BPD is. Borderline personality disorder is a condition characterized by difficulties regulating emotion. This means that people who experience BPD feel emotions intensely and for extended periods of time. It is harder for them to return to stable baseline after an emotionally triggering event. The cause of borderline personality disorder isn't well understood. Diagnosis is made based on symptoms. Symptoms include emotional instability, feelings of worthlessness, insecurity, impulsivity, and impaired social relationships. Treatments can include talk therapy, or in some cases, medication. It is estimated that 1.4% of adults' U.S. population experiences BPD. Nearly 75% of people diagnosed with BPD are women. Recent research suggests that men may be equally affected by BPD, but are commonly misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, PTSD, or depression. A more in-depth description of symptoms of BPD also include fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, unclear or shifting self-image, impulsive self-destructive behaviors, self-harm, extreme emotional mood swings, chronic feelings of emptiness, explosive anger, feeling suspicious or out of touch with reality. Borderline personality disorder manifests in different ways, but for the purpose of diagnosis, mental health professionals group the symptoms into 9 major categories. In order to be diagnosed with BPD, you must show signs of at least 5 of these symptoms. Furthermore, symptoms may be long-standing, usually beginning of adolescence, and impacts many areas of your life. So, Bianca, when did you notice there was something different about the way you process things?
So I don't know if it was the first time. Well, I'll say this much. I think I noticed I was different in processing things when I actually had the language to speak about the difference of processing things. I knew when I was younger that I was different, and that things were seen differently, but it never occurred to me in a way where it was so different that it had to be something outside the ordinary. It was just, I feel this the way that I feel it, and that's normal for me, and that's the way that it is. It wasn't until I got older, and more so when I actually got my diagnosis at the age of 29. I'm soon to be 32, so not too long ago, that I was able to really understand my late adolescence and my early adulthood, on how differently I did process things and why I reacted the way that I do and the way that I did, and all of those things in between. And so it's now that I have my diagnosis and I'm in treatment that I do know that there was something truly different. But prior to that, it just didn't seem, it just seemed like that's just the way that things were. And that the difference wasn't anything that was so battling
Mm.
within myself.
So, you were basically diagnosed at 29.
Yep.
Before you were officially diagnosed, how many times, you know, were you misdiagnosed?
Oh man, let me count the ways. I guess, well, with BPD, it's really interesting because in my research of understanding borderline personality disorder for myself, so that way I can help others in my life and not directly in my life understand individuals like myself who fight and battle and are warriors of this illness, I ended up finding out that up until recently, clinicians, when they diagnose a consumer or a patient with BPD, they didn't even tell them about their diagnosis because they were afraid of community stigma and or the negative impact about hearing of an illness that is so detrimental, to somebody's life, and that for them, what they believe, doesn't have a cure. And in reality, it doesn't. It's really management of it and learning to manage it. But it was kind of like a curse. And so clinicians saw it that way and hid it from their patients and would just try to treat the symptoms. And in doing so, it actually caused way more, harm than good, because if you don't know what you have, how can you really work on, don't want to use the word fixing it because
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing to fix, but learning to work with yourself and work with your illness, and just being a better you, the best that you can. And so it wasn't until that I got my diagnosis at 29 and I started treatment for the first time in over 10 years at that point, because I had bad experiences with the mental health system prior to that, that I requested my records from college and saw that the diagnosis I had gotten from the hospital was the same diagnosis I had been having but was never told about.
Mm.
And so that in many ways I felt betrayed even more by the mental health system, and felt even more negative about my condition, to because I wasn't told. And so it wasn't so much that I've had misdiagnoses as much as I've been not told of my diagnosis. Um, and through that, there have been misdiagnoses where they've said that I've just been depressed or I'm just depressed and anxious. At one point, they were telling me I only had bipolar disorder, when now there's an understanding that you can have both borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder, to which I have both. And that's its own struggle
Yeah.
on an everyday basis to battle those, because BPD, there is no medication to treat it, because it's so internalized in the brain and it's become part of who you are so much that there's no way that a medication can remove that from you.
Yeah.
But there are some symptoms that fall along with my bipolar disorder that can be treated with medication. And so they always tell you that if you have BPD, medication um, shouldn't be the only thing that you're on, because some medications actually also heighten some of the symptoms of BPD. So it's really complex on how diagnosis has worked in the past, how it's working now in terms of transparency, and the understanding that you can have more than one mental illness playing into each other. And for me, it's not just my borderline personality disorder, it's my bipolar disorder, my major depressive disorder, my general anxiety disorder, my PTSD, suicidal ideation, which is more symptomatic than it is a diagnosis, and eating disorders, which
Yeah.
end up all falling in line with the different categories of BPD. So I just feel like I'm a walking borderline personality disorder token child sometimes,
Yo.
especially when I have to talk about it with different people and they go and do their research. And I'm like, I check all the boxes, but not everyone does. Like you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier,
Yeah.
um, clinicians are looking for at least 5 of the categories to be filled to even begin thinking about BPD as a diagnosis. And BPD is not a diagnosis that comes on a one-shot gamut either.
Yo, for
It's
real, for real.
it's definitely something that it takes time to diagnose, just like any other physical illness that usually takes time. Like in particular, I think about autoimmune diseases, where it takes, I think, on average 5 years and 3 doctors or something like that to officially be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And that's kind of like what BPD is. It takes several years, either with one clinician or several clinicians, for it to be a reality, because it mimics so many other symptoms of other illnesses.
Definitely, like it reminds me of, when I got my own diagnosis. I remember one of the first doctors that I saw was like 17 years old, and she had mentioned borderline personality disorder, and it like made me, like think like, what the hell is that? Like,
hmm Because you
like it
think
just,
personality disorder and you automatically think of DID, dissociative identity
yes,
disorder, which is multiple personalities. And so you're like,
yes,
I can't have that, without realizing that I think there's like 3 categories to personality
yep,
disorders. And borderline is like the one of the, I don't want to say simple because they're all complex, but
yep,
it's on a lesser varying degree of the personality disorders,
yep.
essentially.
Like even like the when I was researching for this, the last symptom, feeling suspicious and out of touch with reality. I remember telling this therapist, like, I always feel like someone is following me. Like sometimes I can't really trust people because I feel like people are always out to get me. And she was like, well, that
The
also
paranoia is
sounds,
real.
yes. And she said, well, that also sounds like you might be borderline schizophrenic. And once she said that, I was just like, okay, I'm not coming back to this lady, because now you're giving me like 3 different things, and you're giving me a whole bunch of these drugs. And I keep telling you that they're making me sick and you're not really listening. So I'm not going to come back.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, my college years was a bunch of them dumping meds that all had negative effects on me. And because of that, I felt like a guinea pig. You
Yep.
know, I felt like a guinea pig. And I had a friend that took my pills one day and just dumped them down the toilet. And they were like, this stuff is bad for you. And they had their own reasonings for it. But at that time, like, I wasn't realizing how negatively it was affecting me and not
Yeah.
helping me. And so after that, I was like, I don't want to be no doctor's guinea pig anymore. And I stopped going to therapy. I stopped believing in the mental health care system at all. And the first time I ever walked into a therapist's office was at the age of 16, where I was diagnosed with depersonalization disorder, which is now, if you're looking at the DSM 5, it's seen more as a symptom than a
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, but it falls in line with some personality disorders.
Yeah.
So for me, like looking back, I'm like, oh, that was an early indicator that there was something more there.
Yep.
But they don't like diagnosing young people with mental illness at all, especially bipolar or BPD or schizophrenia, because we're still going through chemical changes in our body up until
Yep.
our early 20s. And so most people actually don't get their true diagnosis until after 25. And so even though it sounds late, me getting my diagnosis at 29 and knowing it and understanding it, I'm actually kind of right there for what most clinicians would claim as like prime understanding of, the balancing of the body and the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember when I first told my mom, and when I first told her, like, because she asked me, I told her I'm going in for a big diagnosis, I'm going in for a big test. And so she was waiting for me when I got back, and she was like, so what they said? And I told her, well, she told me I have XYZ, I have borderline personality disorder, sounds like I might have borderline schizophrenia, but they're more pushing towards bipolar. And then she looked at me and she was like, lo que tú necesitas es ponerte a limpiar, which is, you need to like, you need to start cleaning, meaning you need to just fix your life. Go to school, get a job, and clean the house, clean your room, because that's what you need. And I just like looked at her and I'm like, you don't understand. And I feel like also being an immigrant myself and a child of an immigrant, it hits us different
Mm-hmm.
because not only are we literally kidnapped from our homelands, we have to adapt to a new land. We go through a lot of bullying for not knowing the same language, bullying for not looking the same. We grow up faster than most. We witness things at a very young age that not all adults get to experience. So, on top of that, there's a lot of PTSD involved. How long did it take you to find the right therapist?
Many, many years. So, like I mentioned, I saw my first therapist when I was about 15, 16 years old. That didn't last very long. Um, you know, my parents felt that I was manipulating the therapist when I was only speaking from like my perspective, whether it was the correct perspective or not. Um, it was my perspective and it was how I felt. And so that stopped because they felt that it wasn't helping me. And then I got into college and I found an eating disorder therapist to help me out. And I fell in love with her. Absolutely fell in love with her. I felt I was finally getting my that illness under control. I was starting to eat again. I'm an anorexic binge eater combo. So I spent many years not wanting to eat, over exercising, having body dysmorphia,
Yes.
and then entering college and becoming a binge eater and overeater. And so I had met her. she was, in college they give you these random therapists. You don't get to pick and choose your therapist, nor do you are told that you can,
Yeah.
which is another issue with the mental health system that I always try to let people know, like, it's okay to leave your therapist if they not doing nothing for you. Like, that is the point. It's trial and error, and it's frustrating, but it's trial and error. And then she moved from NYU to Columbia and I got no notification of it whatsoever. And when I came back to see her, and that was heartbreaking. And that, I felt betrayal again on that. And I tried different psychiatrists and therapists within NYU, and it was just guinea pigging, or they weren't taking me seriously, or I was just so depressed and anxious I just stopped going. Oftentimes I felt like I was, especially to white therapists, I always felt like I was like this weird thing to them, because I would talk about home culturally, and they'd be like, oh, but like, tell me more about that, and just ask questions in a way that were very condescending,
Yeah.
that were very experimental, like, and it was like I didn't need that, and so I picked up on that, and I just would just stop. And I would, at one point, I think I did ask to like see another therapist, and then they gave me a male, and I just felt like he was looking at me as a female presented body that was just, emotional and a hot wreck. And I think one time he basically told me like I was a hoe in very little words. And it was just like I wasn't with it. And so I gave up.
Yeah.
By the age of, I want to say, 19, 20, I had given up on therapy and trying to get help, and said that I would deal with it on my own, that it wasn't that serious, that the people had it worse than me, not knowing that I was not being told I was living with and carrying a serious illness that could end up in me killing myself.
Yeah.
And I had already attempted suicide more times than I could count by that time. So, and I wasn't linking the two together. And so then at the age of 29, I was forced into an institution. I was forced into Bellevue after what would be my third to last suicide attempt, because I had attempted 2 times after that. And that's when I was forced into treatment for real this time. And it was kind of one of those, you know, you can't collect $200 and get out of jail if you don't do this
Mm-hmm.
situations. And so I went with a clinic that the hospital had set me up with. And at this point, I told myself, well, if I'm going to be forced to do this, I'm going to do it on my terms. And the clinic was not doing what they needed to do for me. I had a therapist that talked more about themselves than they ever tried to get to know me. And it was having me revisit all the years in college that I went through therapists, and I was like, oh no, we're not going to do this again. And so I left that clinic, and I got really lucky that I have a family member that works for the clinic I'm at now. And I found what I call my forever therapist. And so that was at 29. And almost turning 30 that I met her, and I've been with her since then.
That's amazing. I feel like finding the right therapist, it's so important because oftentimes it's like if we don't find the right person to talk to, we almost feel like lost in a way that you
Mm-hmm.
you can never get better, that there's no one out there that understands what you're going through,
It's
which
detrimental.
yes, which leads to, it's like not finding the right therapist is a gateway to you doing things to your body,
Mm-hmm.
like
Well, and
becoming an
also
addict.
heightening,
Yes.
and also heightening a lot of the symptoms and the repercussions of just suffering. And it doesn't matter what mental illness you have, whatever suffering you're going through with your mental illness, whether you're diagnosed or not diagnosed, not having proper care heightens it so much. Like, abandonment is a huge umbrella within
Yep.
borderline personality disorder, and the fact that I couldn't find a therapist that wanted to understand me, that tried to understand me, that was working with me and where I was at, just made me believe that nobody would love me, nobody could like me, I'm always gonna fuck shit up. You
Yo,
know, if
for
I can't even find a
real.
therapist, then how am I supposed to live my life? There's no point.
Yep.
um
And
you know,
sometimes
and
it's just easier to end things because you no longer will feel like you are a burden to
hmm
anybody.
oh, and a burden more so to yourself,
Yep.
because for me that's what it was. Like, I didn't want to be a burden to other people. I didn't want to hurt other people anymore. I just wanted to stop hurting, and I wanted to stop feeling alone,
Mhm. Yep.
you know. And
Yeah.
so being able to, if you don't want to feel alone anymore, then what do?
Yep.
You you start taking steps to end your physical life in this lifetime. And that's what I did for many, many, many years. And it's it was weird the first time I went, I think at least 6 months without thinking about suicide and having like an active plan. And I remember telling my therapist, like, this is really weird for me to say. And she was like, what is that? I'm like, oh, I haven't thought about suicide in like 6 months. And I thought about it the other day, but I didn't have a plan. And I always have a plan.
Yeah. I feel like there needs to be some type of like special keychain or special coin that people who go through that state of trying to plan their like suicide should get the same way that narcotics and alcoholics anonymous get, because
That would be so dope.
like that, being clean, staying clean for 9 months, it's just as amazing as not feeling like you need to plan your suicide or
hmm
how you're going, to exit, this life. That should be definitely rewarding, because I feel like there's a huge misconception, um, not just with mental health diagnosis, but with also suicide. Like even watching 13 Reasons Why,
Mm.
I used to get so angry at reading the comments people would leave on their pages, and I'm just like, you guys have never been through anything remotely that tough, and it shows, and the ignorance shows,
And it doesn't,
suicide.
and we also have to remember that what's tough for one person may not be tough for me, and vice versa.
Yep.
And so I always say this is not the oppression or my life is tougher Olympics, because everybody experiences differently. It's that they've not experienced anything yet that's brought them to that point,
Yep.
is where they don't understand. And not saying that I would ever want anyone to get to that point, because it is such a dark, lonely
Mm-hmm.
place to be.
Yep.
But if people were just a little more compassionate and empathetic, or tried to at least be sympathetic, then, those comments would be so few and far between. But everyone really has this belief that you pick yourself up by the bootstraps, as they say, right? And you just tug along. And culturally, that's also a thing within communities of color,
Yep.
or the pray it away. And it's just kind of like, there got to be more than that, because
Yep.
praying it away, or it's all in your head culturally, as I was told for many, many years,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't help. It
Yep.
does not help when you are sick and you don't know why, or you're not able to have resources like a good therapist,
Yep.
you know?
And it often does more damage because you, by telling a person that it is all in your head, pick yourself up by the bootstraps, you're literally making the person feel like they are more alone than ever, because one, no one understands what you're going through. And if it is all in your head, then you start to believe that you are crazy and that there's something wrong with you.
Yep. It's a lot. It's definitely a lot, and it's super complex, and it's not as simple as people make it out to be. I
Mm-hmm.
know I get bothered when people are just like, oh, life is worth living and da 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 da. And it's like, as someone who has survived my suicide attempts, and as someone, although not actively engaged in suicidal ideation, not wanting to be here is still an everyday thing for me,
Yep.
you know? And it's
You
not that
can't.
I don't have gratitude towards life, because I do have a different perspective on life now. Like, I want to live and I'm finding things to live for, but I am not mad or upset or angry at anyone who has successfully taken their life, because at that time, like, that is what, and to have been there
Mm-hmm.
and to know what it's like to be there, I just feel such a disservice to tell someone there's something to live for if they feel there is nothing to live for. It's
Yep.
selfish. It's also super selfish to have people live for other people. Oh, live for me because I'll be so sad.
Yep.
How selfish can you be? That makes things even worse, because now I got to live a life I'm not happy with for other people who may not even be treating you right, and are just saying that for
Yep.
whatever reasons they feel they need to say it.
Yep. And I also feel like, if you continue that rhetoric of, be grateful and life is worth living, you can't tell that to somebody who is going through the worst of the worst and tell them that their life is worth living if, one, they're being physically
Hmm.
abused. Like, why is my life worth living if tomorrow this is going to happen to me, and then the next day, and then the next day? We never really know what people are really going through, and that is why we need to be careful with also the advice that we get.
Positive affirmations can be
um
so toxic, people. They can be so toxic.
yeah.
Like, yes, they're well intentioned, but I know for me, I have cut people off, have been all positive affirmation. Like, when you are in a place, those things do not work. They will not change your mindset, and that is not what you want to hear. You want someone to be real with you. You want someone to let you be in space and be told that you are still loved and that someone is there for you when you are ready to come out on the other side. Do not
Yep.
for some people it works, but majority of people it doesn't, and just be mindful of that.
Yeah, that's why I like to, with the affirmations that I start with, I start them from a place of self. It's like I'm telling myself, these things because we need to be told that we can be
Hmm.
loved. We need to be told that we are free to love. And, we need to be told that we are open to receiving love. Just because we have like these type of mental illnesses does not make us
Yes.
unlovable.
And it's so easy to feel like you're not when you are battling, particularly mental illness. And that's not to take away anything else, but definitely when it's all happening in your brain and your brain controls almost everything, knowing and understanding your love can make a world of difference.
What are some misconceptions of BPD?
Well, one big misconception is that only women have it. Um, and that's always an annoying one, because even though the stats say more women have it than men, that's because in times women are more likely to seek help or are forced to seek help versus men, because we're seen as women presenting in femmes, right, are seen as overly emotional. And so the numbers are going to seem higher because society says that we as a group have to go and address that in order to be productive members of society, or in order to be livable or lovable, or whatever other adjective you want to throw in there for that. And so I definitely want to dispel that misconception that it's that only women get it. No, a high number of men actually have it, but they are misdiagnosed continuously because they can't be emotional, and so a lot of that is a societal thing, and they don't go and ask for help, or they're not provided space to feel. And so in my opinion, I feel like it's actually about like 50-50. I really do feel that it's a hit or miss depending on how you identify, and and being diagnosed with it. Because when I look at the symptoms, and I'm thinking about myself and people that I've experienced in life, a lot of men in particular that I know that fit this description would be told that they have substance abuse disorder, which goes in line with it, or that they have PTSD and other things. But it's just like they're gonna go with whatever it is that society tells them, and they're going to see their overreacting as just, oh, but you made me do it, versus an actual emotional response. So that's one misconception. Another misconception is that we're manipulative, attention seeking, and that's not the case. Many don't even know that we're being manipulative. Many times we don't even know that we're doing things that would be seen as attention seeking. If I talk about suicide, like, I'm not seeking attention, especially if I have a plan. Like, I'm not telling you my plan so you can stop me. I'm telling you my plan because I'm being vocal about my shit because I want to be. Um, you know, for some people that might be the case, but mostly that's not the case. Another misconception is that borderline is a variation of bipolar disorder. They are two separate illnesses that can coexist with one another, which is very different. It's not one and the same or one of the same. No, there are two separate diagnoses that can coexist with one another. Trying to think what else. Oh, that it's a choice. That's another one. I don't see how it could be a choice, but apparently it's believed that it can be a choice. And I guess another big one is that a lot of clinicians don't believe it to be a valid diagnosis, which is really heartbreaking because as someone with the diagnosis and holds dear to my diagnosis, because I've had an opportunity to understand it and am learning to live with it and not against it. I want to be seen for what it is, and not seen because it's believed that it's not real. I mean, if that's the case, then you might as well say no mental illness is real, right? And go back to the days of it's
Yeah.
all in your head. And so just got to find a way out of it. So that one for me, and it should be noted that BPD wasn't formally diagnosed until the 1980s, when it was finally listed in the DSM-3, which, for those of you that don't know, the DSM is like the psychiatrist Bible to diagnoses of mental illness and symptoms of the brain. And so the third edition finally had it in the 80s, which then the founder of DBT in the late 80s, who was borderline personality disorder, came up with this new way of treating therapy that was outside
I
of
love
talk.
DBT.
Yeah, DBT is a beautiful, beautiful beast. It takes on from various practices of mindfulness, of cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT, or talk therapy. It takes on, oh man, she like took on this worldly view and packaged it in a way that allows one-to-one conversations and group conversations, because as we talked about, one of the issues with BPD is relationships, and so you're put in groups to work and think out your relationships and your reactions, and it just really is a holistic way of treating BPD that also is a holistic way of not just treating personality disorders but other disorders like PTSD, like bipolar disorder, which all share somewhat similar factors within themselves.
Definitely. I feel, one of the biggest, at least misconceptions for me, not just with BPD, but with any type of like mental illness is, like you said, the choice. No one chooses to feel this way.
I would not wish this on my
It's
worst enemy to live
no,
with this.
exactly. Exactly. Like, I know one of the things that me and my mom used to constantly battle is choice.
Hmm.
Her thing was, you're choosing to sit in bed, you're choosing not to shower, you're choosing to leave your room a mess. Why don't you just get up? You see me working hard. If I had the choice to stay home and be sad and feel all my emotions, I wouldn't get anything done, which is why I choose to get up and go to work, because I have mouths to feed and a roof to keep over my head. And, it's hurtful
Hmm.
to hear those things.
Oh, and another
Um,
misconception is that we can't have healthy relationships or that we'll never be loved. And
yes.
that one I want to dispel so much because it's probably the most hurtful one to hear. Um,
Yeah.
because we already tell ourselves that every day when we
Yep.
have a falling out with a friend or with a lover or with a partner or with a family member, that we are just so unbearable, right? That the people closest to us can't even bear to stand us. And that's just not true. I feel so blessed and so lucky that and being able to call out my illness for what it is and understand my illness for what it is, that I can educate people in my life so that way I don't, one, feel unbearable, and two, that they can still love me without feeling like that I for them that no matter what I do, that their love just won't make sense. You know what I mean? Because that's really what it is. It's this battle of, you're trying to love them, but the way you love them is intense and might be not received the way that it can be because it's so misunderstood. And then the same thing is happening. They're trying to love you, but it's not being received either. And so I really want to dispel that misconception that with a lot of hard work and a lot of understanding, that the most important thing is for you to not feel like you are that burden to others. If others feel that way about you and your illness, that is a them problem. And that is easier said than done, because I know when people have left my life, I go down the rabbit hole and I'm right back to square
Yeah.
one where I'm just like, and once again, I'm never going to be loved, or this is not going to ever happen. And my famous saying is, I'm going to die alone, and I say it
Yeah.
jokingly, but there's part truth to that, because people don't want to deal with and or don't know how to deal with, what the truth was. And when I didn't know my truth, how can I help somebody understand where I'm coming from? And now that I know my truth, I also have power in holding myself the best that I can up against the odds of people that have walked away or choose to walk away or choose not to understand, because I'm like, that's them, that's not me, because I'm doing the
Yeah.
work to understand that for myself first and foremost.
Yeah, and I think like love is also like pretty powerful. Finding love with a mental illness may seem impossible, but it's really not, because being with someone who not just loves you, but is also very sympathetic and empathetic to your feelings and is there um telling you what you're going through, it is okay. And they understand your sadness, and is there anything that I can do for you? You can just like, he even bringing you a warm quilt,
Mm-hmm.
so that way you can just sit there. It is not impossible to find love, and love also, I believe, pushes you to want to be better, want to feel better, or go out and seeking help so that way you can understand what you're going through a lot better.
Definitely agree.
What pushed you, actually, how have you overcome your diagnosis, and how has it held you back?
So I think the biggest overcoming, and I put that in quotes because relapse is a real thing. Um, and I want to acknowledge that. But I guess overcoming for me looks like going a year without a plan for suicide. Um, that is probably the biggest indicator of what I've overcome these last few years of being in treatment and how treatment has drastically helped me. I still suffer from so many other symptoms of BPD and my other co occurring illnesses, but that's the one that, could have and eventually would have ended my presence in this lifetime. And to say that I have not had a plan um, for what will be a year now is a really big thing for me. And so going to treatment, doing research and understanding my illness, being open and transparent about it, have all really helped me to embrace it. Because I was in denial for a really long time over it. I was like, "Oh hell nah, this is not how this is gonna be. This is not how it is." You know, I always tell people I'm not ashamed of having a mental illness, and there has never been any shame around it because I've always tried to be open as possible about it. But there was definitely a part of me that felt shame for myself about, oh my God, like this is what I have, this is what I have to live with. And so acceptance is another way that I've overcome my diagnosis, and, just wanting to be open and transparent so people can understand and be more compassionate and sympathetic and empathetic, and in hoping that more people are diagnosed properly and getting the treatment that they need and they deserve. How has it held me back? Oh man, I feel like I'm late to the game. I feel like I'm late to everything. I'm 31 years old, and what looks like to most people is I don't have my life together is, well, I have a life, I'm living life, I'm starting life, and that's something you do when you are given birth, right? You start to live.
Yeah.
And I feel like for the first time, like I'm living and not just surviving, but I'm not just surviving anymore, that I'm actually finding ways to live. And so in that way, I feel like I'm far behind everybody else in my age group. And that can be really burdening on me because I want to be where everyone else is, but I have to understand that I have to take different steps, and my steps are going to be baby steps until they're adolescent steps, until they're big kid steps. Um, and so I feel like I've been held back in not being able to run and having to crawl.
Mm.
And that looks different, and that looks differently in different parts of my life. I have to do a lot of organizing and planning for goals to reach them. I can't just say, oh, I'm going to do something and go and do it, because my brain doesn't allow for that. And so, yeah, in that sense, it holds me back just because I feel like I've fallen behind. in a grade level or several grade level of
Yo,
life.
facts.
But
Facts.
really, it's an understanding of we all have our own pace. And if I never learned to live, then I was always going to be behind no matter how far I would be. And so, it's held me back in the society, and I put that in quotes, the
Hmm.
society way of thinking. But in reality, I'm right where I'm
Yeah,
supposed to
I
be.
agree. I feel like exactly the same because, the way society is set up, it's a complete construct and it definitely hinders people, even people who measure their lives to how society has everything set up. They don't always live. Not all stable people, quote unquote stable, have lived or really lived, because they're so busy
Mm,
wanting to catch up, have
yep.
the business, have the house, have the apartment, have the family, get married, have the baby, and then it's like, when was the last time that you have stopped and asked yourself, when have you, like lived? What was the best experience? Without
Without
naming,
a plan in place.
yeah, yep. How has your diagnosis helped you keep going?
Um, so that's an interesting question, right? I think I mentioned this earlier about how BPD wasn't given as a diagnosis to its patient for the fear of pushback and negative reactions towards it, and the stigma that comes with having BPD. I know it's mad triggering for me when I go and research my illness to understand it better and see the language, the violent language that is used to describe it. And so I can understand why, doctors had chosen that. But in having my diagnosis, I feel like I understand me now. And in understanding me, I can live. Because before I couldn't understand why I was the way that I was, or I reacted the way that I reacted, or I felt the way that I felt, or things happened the way that they did. Um, I'm not saying everything is surrounding my illness, but large chunks of my life that I can sit and remember, particularly the negative parts, have all been affected because of my illness that I did not know I had. And so my diagnosis, in a way, keeps me going because I want to understand it more. I want to know who it is and what it likes and what it doesn't like, and how I can cohabitate with it as a loving partner versus a doomsday, type of situation. It also keeps me going because I want other people to understand it. I want people to get help. I want people to know that this thing is out there, and that if they feel like they fall into the category, that it's okay to go seek help. And it's okay that if your diagnosis is not this and something else, that's okay too. Oh, I use it as a way for me to educate others along with myself. And in doing so, that I hope it allows people to learn to live compassionately with each other. And if I could change just one person's mindset on it and understanding of it, and they can use that to be compassionate to someone, whether they know they have the diagnosis or not, or whether they perceive them to have the diagnosis or not, then having my diagnosis is has been worth it. That I should be with them.
How has the creation of It Is changed your life?
Oh man, it brought more beautiful people to my life that are understanding and compassionate, are wanting to learn and willing to learn. It's brought a lot of joy into my life as well, because we have some characters on the team, and I just like sit and look at them and laugh because they bring just so much joy. Um, I mean, made me bolder. It's made me more unafraid. You know, there's always that little voice in the back of my head that, you know, tells me that I can or cannot do certain things. And through um, Edis has definitely taken that voice and pushed it further and further behind, where I feel like I can be real and transparent and honest and um, unafraid. And I think that's the biggest thing that Edis has done for me, is that it's made me unafraid to take chances and take risks, to trust in people again. Because, you know, I've had most of my life where I don't really, until this day, I still have trust issues with people, but Edis has given me a space to learn to trust, you know, and to learn um, that there are people out there that can be trusted and do care and do love in a way that is transformational and that is not tied to any kind of agenda.
That's beautiful. What do you hope to leave for generations to come?
Ooh, that's a big question. I mean, I'm not internet's famous or whatever they call it. Even though I feel like part of me is like, that's cool, and the other part of me is like, whoa, child, chill with that. But I guess if there's anything that I'd like to leave for generations to come is to be open and to be flexible and to learn to, and that like research really, if you have the ability to research and use research as a positive means of growth, to do so, because you can only learn so much in doing that and translate it into your life. Be not only a better person for yourself but for society. You can learn to love people for who they are, and like we've talked about in this podcast, love is transformational. Love even from a stranger can change your life completely. And so I just want to leave for generations to know that to be your true and honest self is the most important, that to be transparent is okay, but it is scary and it does come with ramifications at times, but that you can get through them as long as you're speaking your truth. And that love in so many ways will always win, especially if you are willing to receive and give it. Um, so yeah, I just want the generations to know that like they got this and they can get through it, and it's going to look different for all of them, but living in your truth is the way to go.
Looking back, would you change anything?
The easy answer to that is yes. But
I mean, we
there's
could all
ma-
listen. I feel like if I could
there's
go back in
many of
time,
things.
yeah.
There's many of things that I can sit and want to change, but then I'm also in being realistic. Um, that how could things change if the time period they happened in was the way society and things were, right? And I had to unfortunately or fortunately had to experience things in that time frame and within that time period in order to this time and place that is beginning to be so open and loving and flexible and transparent. You know, that wasn't the case, you know, 15, not even 10 years ago. You know, we've come so far in the last 10 years, particularly surrounding the conversation of mental health and mental illness, that I could not be able to change anything back then because it just wasn't a thing, you know,
Mhm.
to understand and change. What I would have hoped is that the actions of other people's would change. You know, I wish that, you know, I had resources to understand my right and advocate for myself as a consumer of mental health services. You know, I wish that those individuals that negatively affected my life within the field we're taught differently, you know? And so it's not so much that looking back would I change anything. I just wish society was different, and society wasn't. And I've learned to accept that, in the best way that I can accept it, and see that society is now moving in a different direction, and I'm a part of that direction now, and I'm going to flow with it.
I love that. All right, y'all, it's time for that One Piece. Not to be confused with that widely popular anime that we all know and love. This is that one piece of advice you would give to a younger you. So let's start with you, Bianca. What piece of advice would you give to a younger you?
Ooh, younger me. So many things I would say to younger me. But I guess the one piece of advice I would give younger me is give me a moment for this one. Would be that yes, you've always felt different because you are different, and it's okay to explore that in a healthy way. And it's okay to know that it's okay to accept and receive help in understanding how different you are. Um, and I say that because I feel like if I had someone tell me, you know, yeah, you see the world and experience the world differently, and let's see what that's about, that I would have lived life a little differently, if I knew and understood that, versus, you know, living it kind of like in a weird dreamlike state where it's like I remember parts when I don't remember parts. And so I would just tell myself like, yeah, you're different, and it's okay, and you feel like you need help, and so don't be afraid to ask for it and get it.
I love that. So, Bianca, put us on. What can we expect from you this year?
So the rest of this year, you can expect me to continue to be mad transparent, mad open about my life. Eventually, I would like to start making my queer life a queer life. Oh my God, I can't even think right now because I'm just like so overwhelmed with the awesomeness that this conversation has been. But I started a little kind of status thing on Facebook called A Queer Life with BPD. Currently, A Queer Life with BPD in the time of quarantine. And I'm hoping to make that more of a consistent thing for people that actually shares pieces of information of what BPD is and giving real life examples as I'm experiencing it. You can also expect to see me on eres.Tea Talks as a host, as the host, and as a co-producer on the series. I work with an amazing team, and we have so much in store for season 2 and season 3 and all the seasons to come. And we're so excited about all of it. So you can expect just more of me and more of Edis to hit y'all on your timeline.
I Man, listen, I can't wait to see more of your statuses because they're so, inspiring. And I feel like in reading more of these statuses, it's going to push others to understand and feel that they are not alone and comfortable with their diagnosis, whatever that they've been diagnosed with, and it's not the be all end all.
Yeah, I definitely hope that my statuses reach out to people in a way that really makes them compassionate. Um, you know, I put a lot out there, That sometimes I'm like, ooh, I put that out there. I did that. Okay.
I mean,
You know?
girl, your statuses is what created this interview, because I feel that it is very important to talk about these things in order to create more openness and understanding rather than believe the misconceptions, you know?
Yeah. I'm glad that that's been a takeaway. Like, thank you.
Listen. Bueno, guys, we've reached the end of this episode, but before I bid you all adieu, I want to pose this question to you all, mi gente. This week, I want to ask, oye, mi gente, what good has happened to you this year? Piénsenlo. Feel free to leave your insight and answers in the comment and review sections. All right, guys, that's it for this week's episode. I want to give a big thank you to Bianca for joining me today. You are amazing. Your platform is amazing. Thank you for all your contributions. Our future generation is going to look back and realize that they are not alone. You can reach Bianca on Instagram at BorinquePhoenix12, spelled BORIKENPHOENIX12. And don't forget to follow their platform at eres.U, ERES.YOU. Remember to follow us at OMG Podcast on Instagram. We are available on all your favorite streaming platforms. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a comment in the review section. Also follow at Deacon Media on Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to know more about the Deacon Media Network and what we do, you can check out the Deacon Media family on deaconmedia.com. Ciao.